we're not too far away from completely de novo generation of some of our molecules, meaning you never need to sort of iterate that DMTA cycle that I referenced earlier in the lab. You completely design in silico, and you're off, relatively speaking, off to the races in terms of the pharmacology experiments, etc. That type of disruption disrupts certainly the early end of the value chain within drug discovery and research, and something that we're on top of.
Welcome to Unnatural Selection, a show about competition, innovation, and the strategies shaping tomorrow's frontiers. I'm Nick Encina. Each week, we speak with pioneers shaping the future.
In episode 34 of Unnatural Selection, produced in partnership with MassGeneral Brigham and recorded live at the World Medical Innovation Forum, Nick sits down with Michael Quigley, Chief Scientific Officer and Global Head of Research at Sanofi. Their conversation explores Sanofi's competitive edge, its perspective on shifting global demographics, and the transformative potential of technologies like AI and CRISPR. Michael shares how Sanofi approaches innovation, including its willingness to disrupt itself when saving lives is at stake, and what these choices could mean for the future of human health. Michael Quigley, PhD, is currently the Chief Scientific Officer and Global Head of Research at Sanofi, with responsibility for Sanofi's main therapeutic research areas of immunology and inflammation, oncology, including immuno-oncology, neurology, and rare diseases, with a mandate to innovate and accelerate first and best-in-class medicines from discovery to clinical translation. Before joining Sanofi, Mike was co-founder, president, and chief executive officer of Dualitas Therapeutics, a biotech company focused on a novel proprietary platform to unlock and develop next-generation bispecific antibody medicines. Mike was also a venture partner with SV Health Investors and previously served as chief executive officer of Therini Bio. Prior to joining biotech, Mike was senior vice president of research biology at Gilead Sciences. Mike received his PhD in immunology at Duke University and completed his postdoctoral studies at the Dana-Farber Cancer Institute. Let's go.
Mike, welcome to Unnatural Selection.
Thanks, Nick. It's really great to be here.
I'm really looking forward to having this conversation. But before we get started, I always start with a signature question just to level set and give the audience a sense of what drives the work that you do. So could you please let us know what need or impact drives your work?
Yeah, Nick, I think it's a great sort of founding question. And for me, at the end of the day, the goal of what I do in Sanofi research is to really drive the increased output and efficiency of the research organization to deliver medicines to patients with unmet need. Part of the reason I joined Sanofi at a really interesting time in the company is to rethink how you do that with the scale that pharma affords. But given my background, we didn't touch on much, but I've seen biotech, venture, and pharma through my career trajectory to date. And so for me, coming quite literally back to pharma, has done so with a lens of how we can be more efficient, sort of capitalizing on all the value that pharma brings from a scale, from an expertise, from an experiential sort of aggregate point of view, and how to apply that in a much more efficient and effective manner as we think about decision-making, efficiency of execution to really drive, a quality output of the research organization and molecules. And again, with the ultimate goal here, really to bring benefit to patients with unmet.
That's excellent. And if we think about Sanofi in particular, how do you see Sanofi's competitive edge or differentiator compared to the rest of the pharmaceutical industry?
It's a great question. Maybe I'll tell you, you referenced my background's in immunology. I've sort of run portfolios in biotechs across immunologic diseases, oncology, neurodegeneration, and ophthalmology. And the reason to sort of frame it that way is because I think there's a unique lens that we've adopted at Sanofi as we think about how to maximize the potential of the expertise we have around immunology in particular, but more importantly, broaden the aperture and the lens at which we view that core expertise. And so this is the evolution of how we're thinking about not immunology and inflammation in a sort of typical sense in the context of our portfolio, but one with a lens of immunoscience, that is taking the core sort of understanding on key nodes or pathways within immunology, but outside of a normal or typical sort of pharma disease architecture, to understand the breadth of where that biology might have applicability as we think about disease and again, targeting those nodes to bring benefit to patients. And so, in the context of the current footprint that we have, our immunoscience lens spans immunologic diseases, it spans rare diseases, it spans neurologic diseases and neurodegeneration. It also spans oncology and retinal diseases. And it's really that core expertise. And I think that gives us a potential edge as we think about some of our peers that are more sort of, like their term, typically oriented or structured within a particular therapeutic area of focus, as opposed to that broader aperture.
It's fascinating. And Sanofi is often described as a company built on innovation. But innovation can mean very different things depending on the context. So and obviously you're in charge of the innovation strategy when it comes to R&D, when we think about the different forms of innovation, there is the headline-grabbing molecular breakthroughs that everybody knows about. But then companies are also well served by innovating across things like processes, profit models, networks, services, customer engagements, and so on. How does Sanofi think about innovation more holistically? And how does that shape the way that you compete in the pharmaceutical landscape?
Nick, it's an excellent question. And really, as I'm sure you're aware, the view that innovation comes at the crossroads of various disciplines. And as we think about how we bring it to bear within Sanofi and how we think about innovation within our core sort of R&D sort of strategy, is really around the intersection of maybe two key areas to highlight today. And that's how AI enables the innovation as we're thinking about research and development, return on sort of investment and productivity that we referenced earlier, but also as we think about device delivery and some of the medicines that we're making. So maybe I'll start with the device delivery, and we can come back to tell me about the component of everything we do. So from a device delivery perspective, patient convenience is a big, as we think about bringing benefit to patients with unmet needs. We work quite closely with our manufacturing and supply colleagues as we think about innovative approaches to how we deliver the medicines that we're making. And we do that very early on, much earlier than perhaps some of our peers do, as we think about the patient experience ultimately in a success scenario. We're bringing that medicine all the way through clinical development and into commercialization. Yes. So things like the number of, for instance, needle burdens, the number of needle sticks per year, that's incredibly important to the patient, right? How can you think about different devices, different formulation for our molecules very early on when we have the ability to adjust that in discovery? That might ultimately have the patient in mind as we think about not only the benefit, but the convenience and the burden associated with the treatment paradigm in many patients' experience. So it's that intersection of technology, material science, of formulation science, coupled with maybe core components as a research organization, how we design molecules better, not just with pharmacology, the disease biology, but ultimately with the patient mind, so that might help them along or ease that part of their journey.
So you start actually thinking about even the implementation science downstream, which is like, how do clinicians and hospital systems use your product to deliver the best possible experience to the patients?
Absolutely. The patient journey comes front and center into the very early days of our discovery processes within Sanofi research.
And you mentioned AI and other technologies there as well. With those modern technologies, AI, big data, genomics, CRISPR, we're hearing all these stories. They're transforming drug discovery. How is Sanofi incorporating these tools to accelerate both speed and precision of innovation?
It's in every part of every aspect of everything we do. So we've doubled down. We are an R&D-driven, AI-powered biopharma company. That's been the transformation that we've been undergoing, the journey we've been on for the last few years. And happy to say that we're already seeing sort of that sort of really increasing the efficiency of not only where I sit within research, sort of the cycle times associated with drug design and sort of optimization, but everything through the value chain that is drug discovery and development. So we have apps and agents associated with proposing optimization associated with clinical trial recruitment, selection, manufacturing, supply, distribution, all in near real-time updates. And so that's sort of embedded in every aspect of what we do. Within research, you might be aware, and the listeners might be aware of a design, make, test, analyze cycle associated with drug discovery. That is to say, design the next set of molecules, make them, of course, test them, analyze them. Time is incredibly important to think about the overall duration of how long it takes to discover and develop drugs to get to clinical trials. Typically, today, that's anywhere from 4 to 5 years from start to the inception of it to starting clinical trials. The ability to AI to accelerate that is here today and will continue to increase, shaving ultimately, hopefully, up to about a year off that cycle time. And it's simply that iterative process that AI is enabling. The last thing I'll say is, as we think about what's the next wave of innovation enabled by AI, but as it pertains to sort of drug discovery and development, biopharma, it's really to elevate the sort of what's next solution as we think to sort of novel biology or sort of how to design molecules. That is to say, what we've aggregated within Sanofi is the ability to pull in both the external world worth of data as well as our internal data sets, both from the clinic and preclinical data sets. On top of that, with a large language model, from any scientist at any level within the organization to start to understand what might be the next biology, the unmet need associated with the patient experience, not today, but in the future, as we think about sort of the next wave of innovation to bring to bear. It's happening today and will continue to sort of elevate the science we do in the next years.
It's fascinating. Yeah, you mentioned in there kind of like looking at the next level of biology. How does, since the topic is innovation, part of innovation is also disrupting yourself. How do you think about that in terms of, the traditional small molecule approach, let's say, to drug discovery? Let's say you have a blockbuster drug. So you're bringing in billions of dollars every single year because of this drug, and say it's treating some cancer or something like that. But now there's like CRISPR technologies or other things that you could actually potentially attack the same disease, but in different modalities. But in doing so, you might disrupt your own business. How do you think about that approach about disrupting yourself before somebody else does?
Maybe a philosophical view on the question, Nick, is I'd rather cannibalize our own innovation internally than have someone else come in and do it for us externally. And that's a sort of statement I think we believe and live by as we think about, I come back to the unmet need of patients. Let's just talk simply about the example you give as we think about sort of cell and gene therapy in particular. Gene therapy, depending on the indication we're talking about, has the potential for single administration and, depending on the situation, up to curative sort of potential in particular diseases, compared to perhaps maybe every 2 weeks, every 4 weeks with the dosing that the patient might experience today. We have efforts, particularly in the gene therapy space, with that in mind. Now, there's a sort of proof points and risk discharge to do associated with that. And so we have both hand in hand in town as we think about some of the diseases we're looking to treat. But case in point, it's exactly the right sort of thinking that we have internally. The second thing I'll add is we're not too far away from completely de novo generation of some of our molecules, meaning you never need to sort of iterate that DMTA cycle that I referenced earlier in the lab. Completely designed in silico, and you're off, relatively speaking, off to the races in terms of the pharmacology experiments, et cetera. That type of disruption disrupts certainly the early end of the value chain within drug discovery research, and something that we're on top of, and sort of both internally and through collaborations, making sure that we're accelerating efforts in that space.
That's interesting. How, if I could ask, how does that affect the costs in drug design discovery? Because I know that the bulk of the costs come downstream at the clinical side, right? But you still have a fair chunk that happens on the discovery side. But if what you're doing now is reducing a big portion of that to in silico, and granted it's early, very early in the pipeline, so potentially the savings aren't that great, but does that affect somehow the bottom line when it comes to discovery work and the costs associated with that?
You're right to point out that, relatively speaking, compared to development, obviously the costs associated with early research are significantly less. That's to say, not to say they're not zero. Yeah. And so from the lens that I have is it's an opportunity cost lens with my own. So if we can offset, both increase efficiency and offset the costs associated with getting to those binders, for instance, and that's the early side, I can spend much more resources making sure that the pharmacology, the safety, the studies are done to the point that further discharges risk before we show them. And so it's my sort of, or the way I'm viewing it is more of a risk balance perspective. There's an opportunity associated with lessening burden there from a resource perspective, and then we necessarily shift to other parts of the drug discovery process.
That makes a lot of sense. And before this next question, first of all, thank you and Sanofi for continued support of the International Consortium on Newborn Sequencing. So I'm obviously very biased on that perspective. There was a recent story in Pennsylvania, baby KJ, the CRISPR story. So he was the first child to receive CRISPR-based therapy to cure his metabolic disease. It's captured global attention. And for countless families who have faced the devastating news that their child carries an untreatable genetic condition, so you guys are in the rare disease space, the prospect of these technologies is profoundly exciting. How does Sanofi think about the long-term prospects of genomic screening and the opportunities and challenges of delivering genetic technologies at scale? So baby KJ is a one, N of one. How does that manifest itself into something that can actually provide at population levels, or is that even a possibility?
That's a great question. First of all, happy to support from the Sanofi perspective sequencing efforts, and I think that's a very important point from the roots in rare diseases that we continue to sort of value and continue to focus on today within the R&D organization at Sanofi. I think from our perspective, we see the promise of genomic medicines, in particular as we're talking about gene therapy, and we have active efforts in that space. The crux of your question in part gets at how do you scale that? And for the listeners, I'm sure that many are aware, there's various delivery mechanisms of gene therapy, viral capsid enabled, as well as non-viral lipid nanoparticle, for instance, as an example, how you deliver those. There's others as well. The way we sort of view the scalability problem is really around, in part, cost of goods. So there's the right target, the unmet need, obviously, which is a given as we think about these rare disease patients. But now it's how do you distribute that both local, regionally, and more globally. So it's what we're doing, coming back to our AI conversation, is optimizing how we scale the actual components of those gene therapies to make them broadly applicable, both within the Western sort of setting in terms of disease manifestation, but also more globally. And those efforts are
I guess if we think about one of the topics that was addressed early yesterday was on shifting demographics in the world, aging populations, lowering fertility rates. As these demographics shift, especially if we think about fertility rates in places like in Europe and the US and other developed countries, and populations age, how is Sanofi burden of disease or the shift in populations? Does that hit the table in strategic discussions yet, or is that something that you don't necessarily address when you're thinking about your R&D efforts?
It's a great question, Nick, and obviously something that we all are dealing with, in particular at Sanofi, our lens. We very much focus on that today. My job is not only to think about the next 3 to 5 years within the Sanofi Research and Development Organization, but what is 10 and 15 years out look like? Health span, as you think about not just lifespan, but healthy living, part and parcel of a lot of that conversation. And the field is evolving to sort of understand how best to sort of appreciate the biologies associated with healthy living over time and age. And a lot of the diseases we focus on in the neurodegenerative space and the retinal space, in oncology, for all intents and purposes, at least the majority of indications, tend to be ones that are associated with older age. And so as we think about our current pipeline footprint and how we're thinking about healthier living vaccine approaches that might be, preventative, ideally, ultimately, on some of these diseases, they're all very much part of our focus today and ultimately a sustainable pipeline output going forward.
Do you anticipate Sanofi needing to rebalance its portfolio away from certain therapeutic areas towards others as the global health map changes?
I think climate change, health span we just spoke about, health equity all sort of plays a large role in how we think about shaping our therapeutic strategy globally within Sanofi Research and Development. So where we are today around the immunoscience sort of lens that we have, we're being thoughtful about what our core therapeutic areas are. And in things like the intersection of, let's say, obesity and inflammatory diseases or inflammation and longevity, we believe we're at an important sort of point back to where we think innovation occurs. It does a nexus of intersection of sort of areas or disciplines where we think we have an ability to extend to what we're terming adjacencies. So maybe perhaps outside of our core therapeutic area today, but not a huge distance away from where we believe we have the right expertise to contribute. So these immune adjacencies are areas that we're actively exploring and in some cases expanding into as we think about our R&D strategy and footprint.
Okay. And if I scale back to the question about innovation strategy and the costs, oftentimes life-saving medicines carry an enormous emotional weight. And many people feel strongly that they should be more affordable and accessible for the right reasons. At the same time, the pharmaceutical industry is often cast as the fall guy in this debate, with less attention paid to the staggering cost of bringing a single drug to market.
But you and I,
And add to that the market pressures from stakeholders, shareholders who expect strong returns that ultimately fuel investment back into R&D.
veterans.
Can you give us a sense of the financial realities behind delivering breakthrough medicines and how those economics shape Sanofi's innovation strategy?
And Nick, it's an important question, and I think one for all of us to sort of deal with as we think about the infrastructure. Our guiding principle within Sanofi R&D is really driven by the unmet need of patients, the patient sort of journey that we spoke about earlier today, and what we might be able to bring to bear to benefit those patients. That innovation is necessary. It's what drives us day in, day out, but it does cost. It does have a cost associated with delivering that innovation. And our belief is that cost from the broader ecosystem should be paid for in part by the infrastructure associated with various countries or geographies in terms of the health systems. Obviously, there's different health systems that are at different points in terms of the ability to pay for the innovation. We obviously have a series of programs in place to sort of vet that. But I do think, as a general statement, as an industry, we need to make sure, and I use that term very broadly, as you think about health systems, government sort of interaction of biopharma, academia, sort of, looking to elevate for the benefit of patients, this innovation. We do need to solve for paying for that because, to your point, most of what we do in research and development today, why Sanofi is striving to increase significantly the probability of success. It is a hard sort of road as we think about drug development discovery. And so part of that innovation that makes it at the end of the day, there's quite a bit more behind it. Breakthroughs, and that I think is we all should bear that cost.
This would be great.
And to be clear, it's an ecosystem. Pharmaceutical companies, biotech are not alone in this process. There are hospital systems, there are research labs, there's academia, there's government, insurance companies. So it's a broad ecosystem, and it's not the pharmaceutical companies that necessarily bear the burden of the costs or also all the profits. It's one of the major players. But I often find it unfair for people to cast that the blame on pharmaceuticals. I remember back in my day when I was in biotech, it was like 1.2 billion or something, so I'm sure it's going up from there. So finally, Mike, you've been so generous with your time. I'd like to finish off with a singular question that you would be in a position to be able to look at and answer. Because from your vantage point, leading R&D at Sanofi, you have a unique view across some of the most promising and ambitious work happening in the company. In fact, you're leading most of that. What excites you the most about the science and innovation underway right now? And if those bets pay off, what do you think it will mean for the future of humanity?
That's a big question. I'll tell you what excites me today, and I think that excitement will only increase over time. And that's, it's enabled by AI, but it's really the dawn of more of a precision medicine-like approach and much broader applicability as we think about therapeutic areas. So most of what within research that's in today underpins any of our programs is data that's translated in a reverse fashion or back from clinical experience. And that allows us to gain patient insights to sort of fuel the pipeline of innovation. We're moving from a situation where, in many situations, we're impacting symptoms of disease. And we're shifting to sort of understanding what the core nodes are that might be drivers, sort of the apex aspects of driving disease pathophysiology. And we and others are in this field are starting to adopt precision approaches that might deplete a certain subset of cells that are driving disease, and potential curative, or at least certainly long-term treatment-free remission in many of these diseases where that wasn't thought of previously, as we think about just treating those symptoms, the underlying causes. And we're seeing that not just within immunology, but more broadly as we think about sort of core nodes in rare blood diseases, and ultimately what we hope will translate into areas like neurodegeneration, where really combination approaches at these nodes really think have the potential to drive to sort of durable disease modification in diseases today that don't have much available for patients.
Well, that's fantastic. Well, Mike, this has been a pleasure. Great to meet you here in person at the World Medical Innovation Forum. I wish you the best of luck in your upcoming panel in the next 20 minutes or so. thank you again for being with us, for your generosity with your time, and I hope that we can have this conversation again in the future.
I really appreciate it, Nick. It's been great.
That was Michael Quigley. Now, unnatural signals.
What Mike kept pulling me back to was time. How long it takes to move from an idea to real medicine, and how much of that time disappears into process instead of science. The signals that we're archiving are: the next leap in healthcare isn't a single breakthrough. It's fixing the discovery system itself. Sanofi is shifting from rigid disease categories to immunoscience, where biology is treated as one connected system. AI and in silico molecule design are being used to collapse the R&D timeline. The real goal isn't speed for its own sake, it's getting to durable disease modification faster. And in an aging world, productivity in drug discovery becomes a moral issue, not just a financial one. What I felt underneath all of that was urgency. Go faster, waste less, get real treatments to real people sooner. That's the pressure shaping everything he described.
Thanks for listening to Unnatural Selection. If you enjoyed the episode, subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone shaping the future. Explore more at unnaturalselection.net and connect with us on LinkedIn and Facebook. Until next time, keep evolving.